Great.
Well, hello everyone. What a pleasure to be with so many people. Today I'm talking about EDI, one of those acronyms that's from the UK, which is Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. And this is a very contemporary thing. When we started, we did not have this language in the UK. And Ben started a long time ago, 1987. Some of you would not have been born. And working in the nature conservation sector in 1987 was a very different scenario from now. So we have been on quite a journey. In 1987, it was really working with people who saw themselves as pure nature conservationists. So their idea of involving people was to get people to contribute to nature, to volunteer for nature in particular. So they didn't have an idea of really taking an interest in people at all. So when Ben came along and talked about involving ethnic minorities, that was a bit of a surprise. They sort of said, well, if you're interested, why don't you just come and join us and things like that, without realizing that the deprived ethnic communities in the urban areas did not even have the simple privilege of seeing anything green in their environment. It was all concrete, not a single tree or anything else, so that many people grew up without thinking about nature. They were battling to survive. Putting the next meal on the table was the thing, so that instead of being able to enjoy nature and grow into loving it and therefore contributing to it, this was not the case. And that was a process that we actually mapped out in the very beginning. Because when we came to this work, our desire was to integrate ethnic minorities into the environmental movement. But we actually did not have any idea how to do so. Ours was a pioneering approach. We didn't think that we need to know everything, like in the grant application where you set out the reason why, how you're going to do it, map out all the outcomes, and also all kinds of things like that. We did not have that, but we took a pioneering approach that we will find out what we needed to do. And this is what made our approach really unique. So we actually started from going out to ethnic minorities and talking about nature and the environment and asking them what they thought was actually environmental participation. We started off with a very small grant scheme and simply had 2 points on the poster. Do you belong to an ethnic minority? Do you want to do an environmental project, and do you need some money? There were no criteria at all. And in hindsight, we saw that this is what actually set us on our road in a very real way. So ethnic minorities, when they saw this and started dreaming about what they thought an environmental project was, came up with things that the environmental sector in this conservation mode actually laughed at, because people wanted things like a garden, they wanted some money to buy pot plants and things like the simplest thing that in their environment where there was nothing made sense as their idea of contact with nature, the pleasure of enjoying nature for the first time. But as we mapped out the process, after 30 years, we could collapse it into 2 phrases, very short phrases. We love what we enjoy and we protect what we love. And in those 2 phrases, it set up the entire process. To enjoy it, you have to have access to it. So you have to change and improve the environment in which people live so that nature became present. And when it became present, you began to enjoy it and own it and therefore love it. And when you love it, it is a human thing that if something is happening to endanger what you love, you all come out fighting for it. You want to protect it. And then comes the contribution. So that was the journey we were taking minorities on. It was a journey in which we also had to convince the mainstream environmental sector to come with us. Because as I said in the beginning, their idea of contribution was basically one way. It was volunteering to do good to nature. So it was about people for nature. Whereas we were talking about, first of all, benefiting from nature. So it was nature for people. So it became a kind of methodology in which we wanted people to see the paradigm, which is a two-way street thing, which is people for nature and nature for people. And when you do that, participation becomes natural and not forced. People want to do this. I often say that if you go onto the internet, everything is there about nature, about what people can do for nature, about what government can do for nature and so on. You can find out anything. But the crux of the matter is, do you want to find out? Do you feel anything? And we came up with other things which were really conceptually very important. For example, we have created the saying which says, change is the coming together of thinking, feeling, and action. So on the thinking side, you have to have enough information to understand in order to participate meaningfully and effectively. And in order to participate, you have to want to participate. So the feelings about nature are something that needs to be built up. And of course, without action, nothing happens. So we're constantly coming up with sayings and so on that strike at the heart of the issue. Another saying we have, which is very powerful, is who we are and what we can achieve depends on how we see ourselves against the enormous pressure of how others see us. And of course, as part of this is racism, and as part of that is colonialism, which still carries on with its domination of many, many minorities in the world. Now, I'm calling them minorities because I'm defining culture through the cultural identity of ethnic minorities groups here. This is how we work. We are working with ethnic minorities in the West, in the UK. Now, one position we put is that the ethnic minorities in the West, in the UK, are in continuity as being representatives of the majority ethnic populations of the world. This is really important to understand because although white people are only 11% of the world population, in many ways they dominate the agenda. And we propose that if we look at where ethnic minorities are now in the UK, after we've worked with them for over 30 years and really integrated them into the environmental sector here, as the circumstances unfold in our contemporary world, and we look at the fact that climate change is at the top of the agenda for the whole world's survival, this gives ethnic minorities in the UK a very particular position in relation to the mainstream white people here. So we are proposing that if the mainstream white population actually engages effectively with minority communities which are in their own country, what they can learn is how to understand intercultural relationships, to identify with ethnic minorities, and to gain skills in negotiating with different cultures that can be carried on onto the world stage, because ethnic minorities are both local and global people. Now, when I say this, I'm very aware that many of you are in very different situations because the sort of ethnic minorities we talk about being here can be the dominant population in the country you are living in. So I'm really very, very interested in your questions because even with many countries, with the minority culture that we have here as the majority culture, yet we still have the legacy of colonialism. And there's also still the creation of a sense of powerlessness and domination, even with ethnic majority populations in different countries. Now, I'd like to share with you some of the things we've done and some of the concepts that we actually push forward in order to build these relationships that you may be interested in. And in the beginning, when we first started, we proposed that different cultural groups that are defined by their traditions have a lot to offer. So instead of getting into the mainstream attitude, which is, oh, if we get minorities coming to work with us, they will do what the majority population of white people do here, which is just come and volunteer and work for nature. And we said, actually, we are not taking that attitude. We feel that people coming from different cultures have a lot to give in their richness of culture, and in the way they see environmental participation in a different way from the mainstream white population. So as part of that proposal of enjoyment and finding identification of nature in this country, we began to work with the mainstream environmental organizations to create what we call multifaceted environmental projects for the first time. So instead of people coming out to volunteer, they actually had trips into the countryside simply for enjoyment. And with it, it was often combined with cultural aspects and mixing with white people participating in that same trip and knowing how they actually think and feel and celebrate nature. So for example, if there were children present, we often went to a botanic garden, found the trees that are from their country of heritage, and we told stories from their culture under those trees for the children. And then we looked at all the different trees and so on from all over the world, as well as what we call the native trees of the UK, and begin to integrate that story into how we participate, understanding particular principles that are important, like the importance of native habitats and so on, but at the same time understanding the role of the different trees and how they might participate in the ecology of the future. So this kind of method created many really interesting projects. For example, ethnic minorities were proposing projects that were purely for enjoyment for many very hardworking, very tired people at the end of the week to come out and enjoy the UK's native culture in trees, in flowers, in nature reserves, and so on, and begin to say, my goodness, this belongs to us too. We are now in a country and participating in it in enjoyment and ultimately in contribution. So this kind of repositioning through enjoyment was part of the methodology. And then the other thing that's interesting, that as time went on, science came to the rescue as well with other ideas. They're not ideas, but facts. One of them is that science now proposes that the whole of humanity is one single blood-related family that originally came out of Africa. And as people moved across the earth and found different circumstances where they settled and so on, they therefore evolved into a different culture. And sometimes they stayed there for so long that they actually forgot where they ever moved and think they are unique. But archaeologists know this is not true. When they dig beneath the earth, they find all the layers, so that one layer at the very bottom is relating us to that original journey which we took, proving that we are indeed one single blood-related family. Now, although when I say this, some people are actually very shocked. They say, but how can they be? People are so different. And again, science comes to explain again that the 0.1% of DNA that is responsible for our common ability to adapt gives us different shapes of our features, whether we're tall or short, whether we have different colors of skin or of hair and so on. This is the thing that makes us physically become slightly different. And this is mistaken by people through pseudoscience before this was known, to say that, oh, people who are dark-skinned are a different human race. There is only one race, human race, and the diversity is in our identical DNA with its capacity to adapt. So this is a very powerful position from which everyone has to rethink their own positioning in the world and how close you want to get to this human family that is actually one family. So I want to also share some of the pioneering work that Ben did in the beginning when we first started. Mapping this out, we then worked with environmental organizations and so on to create these multifaceted sharing projects. But then we were working very closely with them in partnership. We facilitated the connections to ethnic minorities. We trained white professionals to work and understand the approach to building these relationships and so on. So it was a process over many years, but people were very relaxed because this method also hinges on one thing that is very important, which is for the ethnic communities coming through a friend. So we were bringing to them white people of goodwill who wanted to connect, which is very different from, of course, every organization also have racists as well. When we were bringing the part of the white community that wanted to connect. So this coming through a friend was a very powerful thing where both sides were really beginning to relax because the minorities think, Ben is bringing us people of goodwill, and the white people were bringing also relaxed because many of them were quite frightened of going to ethnic minority communities because they feel that we're going into an unknown world. So having Ben there as someone in between also made them feel relaxed. So this is a formula that is very important. The other thing we did very consciously was that we had both staff who were white and staff who were from ethnic minority communities. We were not saying that only ethnic minorities can do multicultural work. We're showing that white professionals could also do multicultural work. And this is really important as well. But as we grew into this relaxed situation where people began to participate and so on, we also were very aware that at one point we would withdraw, which is what we have done now. We no longer do this kind of work and projects because we have embedded the professional ability in mainstream organizations to reach out and build relationships. And the other thing very important to notice is that Ben has never been and is not a professional environmental expertise organization. We were about expertise in participation. So there's a limit to what we can do. For example, we can take people onto nature reserves and enjoy themselves, looking at beautiful places, arranging for picnics and activities, going on boats and all sorts of things like that. But there's a limit to what we can do because we cannot interpret the landscape. We cannot point to a plant and give them the name. We cannot talk about its needs. We cannot introduce habitats, talk about endangered species, and the expertise related to professional volunteering work that is effective in making a contribution. So we have arrived at a point where saying to the mainstream community of professionals, this is your time. You have the expertise. You know how to reach out. You only have to keep building up what you have built up in terms of enabling minorities to also contribute in an expert way alongside you. And it also opens the fact of minorities now aspiring to be environmental professionals, aspiring to represent minorities on boards, on committees, on advisory groups, and so on. So the change has happened, and we are at a different stage. We now have other ethnic minority-led groups besides Black Environment Network. We have people who are leading instead of following. For example, we have the organization called Climate Reframe that you might like to Google, which lists over 150 multicultural environmental activists. Why we did this was actually with Dog Society. Dog Society is actually called Dog Society because they work with documentaries. And at one point, they actually went to the BBC and said, how come we don't see any ethnic minority faces on the BBC? And the BBC said, well, where do you find them? So the response was to set up Climate Reframe as an open database listing ethnic minority, multicultural activists. So they now have no excuse. And lo and behold, this open database has changed the ballgame. What is happening is it's being used by environmental organizations, people organizing conventions and conferences, doing consultations, or just trying to reach out and find experts to become consultants or advisors or to join committees and so on. So it's something quite powerful. And it is a model, not just for opening up the participation of ethnic minority groups. It's a model for any disadvantaged group, to list people, to make them accessible, to make them visible, and so on. So Ben working on all these fronts is really important. We have proposed as a principle that there is no such thing as a pure environmental project. A pure environmental project is one that has neglected its social, cultural, and economic context. And you can actually change those four words around. You can say there's no such thing as a purely economic project. A purely economic project is one that has neglected its environmental, social, and cultural context. So these ways of thinking are very powerful because it opens up different sectors to come into the equation and open up participation. For example, Ben has first of all targeted the environmental organizations that actually have a remit to work with people. But we have done that project now, and we're now actually working with different sectors. For example, instead of just concentrating on diversity, we're now working with the education sector, many of them who say, yes, we want to work with the environmental sector and diversity. Would you like to come and talk to us? So there are other frontiers that bring in the mainstream in a very different way. And also the social sector, which has awakened to the fact that there are huge social benefits. Deprived groups can really gain a lot in their quality of life by simply being connected to the beautiful environmental sector. You see, the environmental sector has something unique to offer in participation because of beauty and because of circumstances in which you can have other activities. So for example, ethnic minorities or other disadvantaged groups can have the simple pleasure of increasing their quality of life by going on a picnic in the nature reserve. And when they're there, they get interested, they find out about things, and it's very fascinating. So these can become part of their lives. And I also say to the environmental sector, which of course was quite excited in what is called unlocking a vast missing contribution from disadvantaged groups in the form of ethnic minorities or other disadvantaged groups like people with disabilities or even just women and so on. So they're excited, say, yes, many people are not yet engaged and we can open up this great contribution that will add to our sector. But we also told them, but hang on a minute, also respect the fact that some people might not go all the way because of their living standards. They might be so tired from the sort of jobs they actually work with during the week that they have no more energy at the end of the week. And they might just want to rest and just enjoy nature without going any further. And that's completely legitimate. Many of the people are working people, they pay taxes. Why shouldn't they actually enjoy the environment which they often pay for, like our beautiful national parks and so on? So there are different ways of thinking that actually come into the equation as well. And one last thing that I want to mention is that in the beginning, when we first started working with the environmental sector, the race equality councils were very surprised that we want to work with in such a helpful and supportive way, because they said, why don't you just sort of hammer them over the head, tell them they're racist, and tell them to just get on with it without helping them? But we said, no, this is the wrong way, because in the methodology we will develop, there might be things we haven't foreseen that really help with participation. And we have been proved very right indeed, that by helping and supporting the sector, we've enriched it. First of all, they never thought about people at all. And they began to understand that there are benefits, co-benefits to environmental participation. And when they identify the benefits to people and help people access them, that is when a lot of people will actually come back and begin to contribute. So identifying benefits is really important. And how you design a project is very important. For example, planting trees. We all know planting trees is good for nature, but if you work with very deprived groups in an area with no green at all. Instead of taking these people out into the countryside to plant more trees, maybe what should be considered is plant trees where they live. It is good for nature. We have more nature. It's good for people. It helps with pollution. It helps with sequestrating emissions and everything. And it is good for people. So it's a win-win on all sides. So creativity is important. The involvement of artists in their creative mindset is really important, and we often use them. So the ball game has really changed. From starting from a point of integrating people, we've nearly done the whole job now. And we are now in a different circumstance where climate change is so important as a worldwide issue. And here we have a group of people from whom the white mainstream, which wields power in the world, can learn intercultural skills, negotiation, feel at ease with different cultures and so on, and begin to really bring world cultures together to have that worldwide collaboration that we need so very much. And identification of the world is so important. You know, ethnic minorities are the living world news. Very often the news do not cover what is happening in other countries, but minorities already know. So we can get very close to the world as well through our minorities, and therefore identify with it and have the motivation to join with all these countries and work together. So the other thing I wanted to actually mention is that our progress was also something that was helped by historical events. For example, the murder of Stephen Lawrence in this country sparked a huge racial consciousness in this country and produced a Macpherson report, which hones in on institutionalized racism, which was given vocabulary for the first time, identify particular groups around racism that needs to be worked on, like the police and other institutions and so on. And another worldwide event was the murder of George Floyd, which really, again, shocked the world and brought many organizations, including the environmental sector, to renewed commitment to equality, diversity, and inclusion. So history is part of this kind of commitment building through social historical events as well. So I've talked a lot about our processes and some of the major ideas and concepts as well. So I would really like to actually hear your questions and see if I can contribute to your situations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Judy. It's great to hear from you and all of your experiences with Ben. And I loved what you said there about changes, the coming together of thinking, feeling, and action, which I think is such a great quote. And I think it, it links beautifully to our topic from last week as well, where we spoke to Trenton Schultz-Franco about the Special Bird Service in Canada, where they encourage marginalized communities to engage with nature through bird watching. And, that importance of immersion and sensory experience of being in nature and feeling welcome in that space, and how that really feeds towards that connection and that love for nature, and that then builds towards protecting it. And so yeah, I'm sure we'll have some great questions from the audience for you now, so I'll kind of chair those. If people want to put their hands up, we'll try and get to those in order. And if anyone would like to ask the questions in the chat box instead, I'm quite happy to read those out as well. And we'll do our best to address as many as possible. So do we have any hands up now? Just scanning through the chat as well. I'm not seeing any come up just now, but if you would like to ask a question out loud, please do feel free to jump in.
I'd like to comment on what you actually just said about Canada and bringing people into bird watching and so on. That's a really good approach because it chimes in with what we have doing, which is about opening up enjoyment to ethnic minorities who might have been, in a way, isolated from all this kind of activities, you know. And one of the parts of the training we do with white professionals is the sense of the kind of approach and the messages you send through that approach. So first of all, we talk a lot about the sense of welcome. We say to them, if minorities, when they engage with you for the first time, if there's no sense of welcome, you can call it quits. It's all finished. You know, so the working at the sense of welcome is really important. And part of the working with the sense of welcome is to work out, when we go first time into the ethnic minority, is there something you can offer? So for example, offering something very simple like, would you like to come and see one of our most beautiful nature reserves and just have a picnic? So that your message is, we're out there to get you. Your message is not, we're out there to get you so you can volunteer for nature. Instead of that, it's about sharing and coming into an arena which you can own and be part of. And when that happens, then people become interested. Always remember a project we did with Edinburgh Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh. And with them, we developed a whole range of workshops where people can come in and enjoy nature and all sorts of aspects of it. And Edinburgh Botanic Gardens was so creative. For example, they had things like hat making workshops. They say that each week, go around the garden, we have to trim off all kinds of leaves, just as a practicality. And we end up with all these really beautiful leaves, from the smallest intricate things to the most gigantic ones. And we know which are poisonous and which are not poisonous and all that. They select these leaves, and what they do each week? A hat making workshop. And when they're making hats, they talk about different plants, where it came from. So if you want to, you can go out and look at the plant, where it is, and so what it needs, and so on. So this element of education and enjoyment and goodwill is really important. And they never talked about come and volunteer in the beginning. But what happened in the workshops, it got to the point where people were standing up and saying, you're doing so much for us. What can we do for you in return? We'd really like to do something. And that was when the volunteering began happening. And again, they didn't say, oh, come and volunteer straight away. They actually said, can we show you what you can do? So they showed them different kinds of volunteering so they can choose as well, so that they never feel like, you know, the environmental organizations reaching out because they want to use you. Mm. That's a message you never want to give. That you're out there to get them to be used. Instead of that, it is about inclusion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so I can see there's a couple of questions have come up here in the chat. So Michelle says, in the US, we have an anti-woke, anti-DEI movement. Any ideas for how to address this?
Again, you know, just as I said, you have to really approach people and bring people together in a very natural human way. It is a human process, you know. So you're not going, again, this whole thing, as I said, you know, sometimes with people from race equality councils and so on, who deal with a lot of really negative incidents, like people being attacked, violence in the community and all that. So their methods are very much about getting the law into place, warning people, you cannot break the law and all this sort of stuff. And at another level, one can go down that road and actually begin to waive laws at environmental organizations. You shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. And then on the other side, then say, you have to reach out to ethnic minorities, so without a single shred of talking about the enjoyment of it, the richness of it, and what the organization is going to gain from it in a very natural way. So again, the framing of equality, diversity, inclusion is, as I said, you know, it is not about doing good to a small group of people. It is about the vision of a society in which it belongs to everyone. And we are out there participating because it is a great and enjoyable thing to do. So the atmosphere for equality, diversity, and inclusion has to be constructed in a very positive way that it draws people into saying, wow, we want to do that. Look what they are doing. In the UK, you now have people who love this. They haven't been dragged into it. And people haven't been pushed into minority communities without support, without any understanding, and do all the wrong things. And a lot of white professionals who've not been in touch with minority communities say, oh my God, you know, for the first time, we're going to become an ethnic minority. I'm going to walk into an entire ethnic minority community and be the single white people there, and I'm frightened, you know? So you need to get people to relax. They also need to be welcome and find it an enjoyable and enriching sort of circumstance that they want to repeat.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I mean, I think that that feeds quite well into a second question that I can see below there, which says, thank you for, this is from Adriana, and it says, thank you for a wonderful and inspiring talk. Do you see a need to talk about equity instead of equality? Many thanks.
Well, it is the state at which your group is really. You have various starting points, and if you look at them and where they are, you'll find where your starting point is. So it's not an abstract thing. I think all the way I'm through this talk, I'm saying, you know the situation. It's like when Black Environment Network, we are from the ethnic minorities, and we are saying, actually, in relation to environment, we don't know the situation. And we had to reach out to the ethnic minorities on council estate, walk on the council estate, see what it's like among all this concrete, how people are completely disconnected, how they are suffering racism, how they are struggling in their work, making a living and so on. And then reimagine with the opportunities in the environmental sector, how can we make this different? How can we make this a human thing that changes the situation? So whenever you go into any situation, you have to have that attitude. Even in your own organization, like I said, we are from ethnic minorities, but in those situations, combining ethnicity and environment, we had to find out, you know? So even among organizations in the environment and so on, you perhaps have to find out what is happening in your own organizations and what are the opportunities that you might not have used in your own organization that will belong in this arena of the interface of minorities and environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see we have two people that are on video. I wonder whether they have questions or if they, I didn't know if the hand raising was working. We've got one person with a raised hand as well. Oh no, here we go. Okay, so if I hand over to you, Jane.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Judy. That was a really engaging talk. And I think going back to sort of creative approaches, I'd like to explore that with you a little bit. I work for the IUCN UK peatland programme, so a lot of our work involves advocating for peatlands, but trying to share that message more widely. And a lot of the partners that we work with are starting to use more creative approaches to engage people with these habitats. And like you say, spend time with them. So we've been doing some work with a collective of artists called the Art and Energy Collective. They're creating a mass participation artwork called the Mossy Carpet, which helps to teach people about the importance of sphagnum in mitigating climate change. So quite a scientific message in a way, but the approach that they're using is to get everyone to get a bit of wool, make a mossy pom-pom, and add to this creative project. And I think we're seeing increasingly with our partners in the peatland community and a lot of the NGOs that they're using these kinds of approaches. But also I sometimes encounter barriers to that in itself. So people that don't really see the value of art, or they feel a bit disconnected from it, you know, the kind of serious scientists. So how do you think we can work to bring all these sort of threads together? Because these approaches are amazing ways of engaging groups that might be put off by the science or might feel that, you know, there's some sort of expectation around an existing level of knowledge. But actually, if you just get someone to go into a peatland and draw what they see, anybody can do that. So how do you think we break down those barriers within communities that don't necessarily see the value in using different and more creative approaches?
Get them to talk to people who experienced it. You know, it is a revelation. I think revelation is also a wonderful word. You know, and someone also in the chat I saw was talking about, you know, that when you bring people, a lot of people just begin to teach them at once, like they're going to school. I mean, a lot of schools do that, you know, but they take children into a beautiful place. They ruin the experience by getting them to work at everything, you know, measure this, understand that, and so in a very dry way instead of a way that is relevant to their lives. I think finding the important relevance of a lot of very scientific processes to people's immediate lives is really, really important. For example, of climate change, you know, the fact that people just get too hot, that is really personal. You know, you get so hot that you cannot stand it. That is really personal. And we now need to add on to that the knowledge that gets any hotter, in a few hours, you're going to be dead. You know, these are very serious messages that if you get artists to really understand, I think that's a real place for a project where we choose a minimal critical number of artists in our locality or in the nation or whatever, who have a continual, ongoing relationship with real scientists. You know, a lot of real scientists do not actually have faith in the understanding of the general public for science. They say, oh, you need to give them the most simple things because they won't understand anything. But artists, if they can be actually in contact with the most important concepts that scientists think are the most important, but they think are too complicated. If there's this communication between artists and scientists that's ongoing, I'm sure artists can actually illuminate the community as to this understanding in a very creative way. And then we will get actually a much more informed public with the key things that we need them to understand in order to drive forward the participation and the support that scientists and so on need to really pressurize change in the government. So we need numbers, you know, hundreds of thousands of people wanting change. Unless they understand, they won't come behind it. And I think that if we had that kind of strategic project, it would be very interesting. But I think that you need to understand also the different contribution of different modes of creative projects. The one, like you say, where as simple as come in and draw with an artist and the pleasure of it, to things where you think that they come in with a picnic and so on, and someone is fascinated about what is this plant, and someone can talk about it because someone asked, what is this plant? And I think that there's also a lot of work to be done to get scientists and people like guides and so on to work with creative storytellers to learn how to tell a better story. Same information, better story.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So these are the stages of communication are not actually mapped out. I think it would do us a lot of good to map out these levels of communication and which each one does and how they actually build up to what we really want in an informed public.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Judy. I think it's really interesting from a sort of, well, personal interest in IUCN in terms of education and communication, and that communication side and the positivity that's needed and the creativity that brings, you know, that emotional connection and the love.
Yeah. We got to get to the point, as I said, instead of we going to the public is so interested, they come to you and say, we want to know more about this. We want to do something. What is it? You know, actually, there are many people who come to that point and not getting the answers.
Yeah, yeah. And I can see we've got another hand raised from Michelle.
Hello, Michelle.
Hi, I'm willing to defer to someone else in the chat since I already asked one, but I'll give you that option first if you want to, and then I can ask mine since I already asked
No,
one.
you go ahead.
Okay. So I talk you're making me think a little bit, which is good. So in some of the nature education that I do, I talk about implanting the concept of reciprocity early on. And you know, it doesn't mean like that you have to give back, like you're saying, like it only counts if you're going to volunteer or whatever, but at least planting. So what I say is, if you enjoyed this thing or this place, like just think about what you might be able to do so that that enjoyment can continue for you and for others behind you. So I kind of plant that seed early, but I'm wondering what you think about that. Is based on what you've said, it sounds kind of like maybe I should hold back on that.
It's timing. Timing
Okay.
is crucial. If people come the first time, you immediately put volunteer on the agenda. They say, oh yeah, you see, it's not really for us, it's for them. Yeah, they're going to get their money's worth out of us. So it is timing. And people do need to repeat anyway. No one is going to convince anything if they are first timers enjoying anything to be convinced and feel connected from a one-off. Nobody. So you have to repeat anyway. So timing and intuition about where people are.
Thank you. That was helpful.
Okay. Who is next?
I can see another question in the chat that I'll read out. This one's from Amy. She says, if you work in an all-white organization, how can you show that you're multicultural and open to all being involved? It feels a bit like the traditional colonialism.
Well, you build your image. If you build your image in such a way, that's what people think you deserve it. You know, you have to be seen to reach out. You know, you have to be visible in the actions you take, and then you will get the reputation you need. And you have to move on different fronts. You know, if you have a job, it appears in the ethnic minority press. If you have local ethnic groups nearly next door to you, why don't you go and say hello? You know, do you appear in the local newspapers, which are always looking for stories? Do you invite people onto your beautiful nature reserves? All those things are so doable. They don't cost very much. And you have volunteers anyway. So you need to have your own organization seeing its way and doing things that gives you the image you want to project.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just coming across the other messages in the chat here, which I'll read out, even though they're not necessarily questions, but just for the benefit of anyone watching the recording back. So I think you mentioned this earlier, something Mark said. One of the issues seems to be that for all communities, when we get them out into nature, we immediately try to teach them things.
Yeah.
We don't provide opportunities to just enjoy nature for nature's sake. And then one from Michelle there as well, saying, I love enjoyment being at the centerpiece. Thank you so much. And
fascination. I want to just break in and say that, you know, that we make a lot about the beauty of nature, but not all nature is beautiful. You know, a lot of places are quite ugly. But you have, or there can be a very ugly and very important endangered plant. I remember being shown one in South Africa and being shown that this tree, there's only 2 of them left. It's really wonderful, but it was a very ugly tree. You know, but enjoyment is a great point, starting point, because that is human nature. We, as I said, the 2 things I said, we love what we enjoy and we protect what we love. So the introduction where you can be very purposeful in doing 2 things. Firstly, the enjoyment of beauty and surroundings and so on. The other thing is the enjoyment of your staff. Staff has to be really welcoming. So the image of the organization and so on. But as you go along, people will, not every plant is going to be beautiful, even in a beautiful place. You can purposefully find a rather ugly plant and talk about it to see how fascinating it is. You know, people, they enjoy fascination as much as they enjoy beauty. So you need to introduce this other element of fascination and of the things And food is such a wonderful thing to actually relate to in terms of plants and so on. Show people plants from which their food are related.
That's something
You know, this kind of relevance thing that bring it into ordinary life and not something like, oh, when I talk about nature, it's sort of all up there. It's not really about me. To find things that are really about them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, so there's more positive feedback here in the in the chat. We've got a message from Miriam saying this is gold dust. Have you written a book?
I know lots of people at the moment are asking me to write a book, and I'm considering it.
should.
And what I'm saying is, what I would really like everybody who says that, send me notes about what you want to see in it.
Okay, so you've got your homework there, Miriam. You can get in contact. I think Judy's shared her email there in the chat box as well. So if you did want to get in contact, please do. We've got more feedback here. I'm just looking for questions as we've only got the last 5 minutes left. There's one here from Gina. She says there's a great deal of work being done currently in every country or combined authority areas to develop local nature recovery strategies. We need to ensure as many people and as wide a range of people are engaged in this process as possible, and that surveys and workshops are open to all. This is being led by county councils and authorities. Do you have any tips for ensuring the surveys show that we want all to input and make it easy for people to engage? The same for running welcoming and inclusive workshops, perhaps running fun sessions and linking them to strategic discussions.
Well, you see, it depends on where they are as an authority, what their present relationship is to the general public that they say they want to engage, you know. So you need to notice where you are and make your starting points. If they are in the beginning, then you not need to start in the beginning. If they're in the middle, then you can do other things and so on. But just trying to get people to engage, this feeling, when you need that, suddenly you're there, you know. When we're not part of it, doesn't work.
Yeah.
People, especially with deprived communities, you know, one thing about the middle class community is that they got good jobs, they have good lives, they enjoy themselves and so on. They have free time, they have energy, they have money, they have everything. So the kind of traditional situation from which volunteering grew was a do-gooding situation, do good to other things because you yourself don't need it. Yeah. Whereas when you come to the point where there are people who also need things as well as being able to give, that is a situation that is different. And we create that situation of that missing part, which is the enjoyment, which the middle class grew up with. They grew up with gardens, they go out into the countryside when they're children and so on. So they loved nature without even thinking about it. But it's not true for many people. And that is where the process was mapped out within the work of Ben.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so I suppose as we come towards the 6 o'clock mark, I think I've managed to reach all the questions that are in the chat at the moment. I hope I haven't missed any. If I have, please do get in touch afterwards. But I wonder, Judy, whether you can leave us with any sort of final thoughts or links or book suggestions if you've got a bit that we should follow up on.
Well, you know, through the years in the UK, we have jointly written many guides to working with ethnic minorities. So maybe I can pick some and send it to you, Sophie, if you want,
sure.
that.
Yeah,
and as I said, the main message is, you know, people are rich reservoirs of cultural and social components, and that they have huge potential. And it's just a pity if they're not connected with nature in terms of both being able to benefit from nature as well as to give to nature. So those of you who are professionals, think about this deeply. You have a great role to play to opening up this vast missing contribution of nature to people and people to nature.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Judy. So that kind of brings us to the end of tonight's talk. So I'll mention as well that this webinar is actually the second in a summer series of 3. So we're running them each Wednesday evening from 5 till 6 p.m. UK time. So the next week will be our last. on Wednesday, the 17th of July, when we'll be hearing from a fantastic researcher, Dr. Bethan Stagg, who's working with the Access Project. And I can share the link to register for that in the chat here as well, and in the video description once the recording goes up. So following all of these webinars, we're going to be writing up a summary of some of the topics that we've discussed, and we'll be presenting these at the IUCN Regional Conservation Forum for Europe and Central Asia in Bruges in October this year. And that will be along with our summary position statement from last year's webinar series as well. So thank you again to our fantastic speaker this evening, Judy Ling Wong, and thank you all for attending this webinar. We really appreciate all of your time and input, and we hope you have a wonderful week.
Bye-bye for now.
Bye, thank you.